So we're starting off with hip internal rotation. Now, the hip is a ball and socket joint. It's a ball in a socket, that's your hip. It can move in all different directions, or it should be able to. The problem is we often neglect a bunch of different parts of that movement, one of them being internal rotation, the ability to rotate inside. Now, a lot of people are scared of this movement, but the thing is, if we forget about that movement and we can't internally rotate, it falls on the spine to do that. We get a lot of issues in the lower back. We get a lot of sports injuries from not being able to safely internally rotate and actually do it with the hip joint and not the hips and the spine, okay? So we're gonna set up, sitting against a nice flat wall. Heels are wide apart, a little wider than shoulder width, a bunch wider than shoulder width. And we're gonna do your best to drop the knee inside as best as you can. Keep your toes up, okay? Try not to let your toes come down to the ground here. Try to keep your toes up and come around into internal rotation stretch. You should feel a stretch in your hip joint, okay? The taller you sit up and the more forward you can lean, the more you'll get into a stretch. If you literally can't move and you want to get a bit extra range of motion, come off the wall a little bit and you'll notice you can get a little bit deeper, okay? So just find a position that works for you, that you get a pretty solid stretch. Right about there is good for me. This knee doesn't move. This is just locked in and planted, okay? Starting to get dripped on. I think everything's melting on the balconies above me. We're gonna hang out in this stretch for about 60 seconds total, okay? Try not to let your hips adjust and move and shift. You wanna try to keep your sit bones straight down on the ground and all the movement just comes from that hip joint. This one will come a lot easier with practice. This is something that no one ever does unless you're working on mobility directly targeting internal rotation. So if it feels a little weird the first day, by week 3, it's gonna feel great. Now, I'm gonna push, make sure that I'm pushing above my knee. If you're pushing on the knee joint or below, we're gonna get some stress in that knee, especially with internal rotation. If your hip doesn't wanna move, the knee will take a bit of that stress. So we wanna make sure we're pushing above and trying to basically rotate the thigh down as opposed to shearing on the knee. Again, this knee just stays pointing straight up to the ceiling, or the sky if you're outside. All right, so we're gonna give you 2 commands, push and pull. When I say push, this hand and this hand, you can use them both really if you want to, aren't gonna move. All I'm gonna do is push this knee and this hip, get this hip to work against my hands, okay? So I'm not actually pushing it down. Now, well, even that felt a little funny, so careful here. I'm gonna push against my hands with 20% effort. Okay, we're gonna stay there with 20% for a few seconds here. When I say pull, we're gonna try to get this knee down on the floor, but we'll worry about that later. We're gonna go up with 40% pressure into your hands. 60% pressure. You're trying to undo the stretch that we got into. You're trying to lift that knee out of that stretch, lift your hip, or rotate your hip out of that stretch. Pushing 60%. 80%, again, the hands don't move, they don't do any pushing, it's the knee and the thigh pushing into your hands. Your hands are just holding it solid. And as safe but as hard as you can, 100%. Trying to touch your knee to that wall behind you. Come on, fight hard, fight hard. Give me another 5 seconds as hard as you can. 4, 3, when I say pull, we're trying to touch the ground. 1, and pull. Try to pull your knee down towards the ground. Oh, come on, get down there, get down there, get down there. Working into that hip. Everything in here should be feeling total garbage right now. Oh my God, holding steady. Pulling, pulling, pulling for another 3, 2, 1. Get your hand on the outside and hold it there. Holy crap. You might actually see less gains at the beginning than you do a little bit later on. Once you start to get used to it, then you're gonna unlock some crazy expansions of range of motion. Okay, everything is relaxed right now. We're just letting the knee, the hip get used to this position here. Okay, we shouldn't have tension. I let my toes come down. Try not to let your toes come down. Try to keep them up. Just kind of holding steady for maybe 5 seconds. And peel yourself out of that position. So we just worked on your right hip. You're gonna stand up tall. You're gonna get your left hand on a wall or some sort of support, and we're gonna do a hip car just like we did on our warm-up on the right side, all right? 1 rep backwards and forwards on that right hip that we just used. Take your time, move nice and slow. When you're done that, you can back it up to the beginning of what we just did to do the same exact process on the left side. When you're done your pushes and pulls on your left side, then we're going to do a hip car on the left side, one forward and one backwards, and that's one round.